Hi gang, Rob here. It's the evening of 15 January 2017 and I have a video for you guys tonight, and frankly it won't be as much of a video as it will be a commentary with some Bark River eye candy in front of the camera. And the topic of this commentary is frankly a video I've been meaning to make for a long time, and what precipitated me finally making it tonight is an email I got from a subscriber, and it was so well worded and expressed such a common concern or question that I thought this was the time to do this. And also because I've had enough time and opportunity and put forth the effort to do some research and investigation and just to listen. So let me preface this video by saying that it is the result of absolutely no duress, persuasion, or bribery of any kind. It's going to be a commentary on Bark River and on Mike Stewart and on the Bark River Knives product. But neither these three nor the other 3 or 4 Bark River knives I own have been given to me, other than going out to dinner one night and Mike picking up the tab. No promotional or sponsorship money or remuneration or in-kind contribution has ever been made to my channel or to me by Bark River Knives. And in fact, I didn't really know much of anything about Bark River until about a year and a half ago, when Derek Bone moved Knives Shipped Free from Oregon to Escanaba, Michigan, and I went up to visit my friend Derek, and while I was there, he introduced me to Mike, and you remember from September, October of 2015, a 3-video series on Bark River that I did. And that was the first time I'd ever met Bark River, and really the time at which I started seriously looking into their products. So my bias comes only from, well, frankly, a personal affection I have for Mike after spending countless hours with him, and a love of their product. So, so what's the question? Well, there are 2, and they can be well summed up in this email. I'll try to hold this so you guys can read along. Hi Rob, I wrote you this while you are no doubt in Escanaba, which was a week ago or so, home of Bark River Knife and Tool, Mike Stewart et al. To be honest, I'm pretty new as a knife hobbyist, lived in big cities for most of my life, and only the past couple years have discovered the joy of camping, bushcraft, and knives. I have found your videos the most helpful and enlightening source of learning in all things sharp and pointy, and of course I've bought a few, more than a few, things based on your videos. I have implicit trust in your judgments, obviously not to imply that you can't make mistakes, but you have my confidence. In light of this, I started to ponder Bark River again with your recent post in the snowstorm, especially since I'm growing to love fixed blades even more than folders as of late. What I find puzzling is just how divided people seem to be about Mike Stewart and BRKT. There seems to be no middle ground about the man or the knives. I've no doubt you're aware of the things reported online about Mr. Stewart and the QC of his products, and obviously you're still a fan of him and his work. I'm curious though, if you if you can give me any doggone it, if you can give me any additional insight on the controversies surrounding Mr. Stewart and Bark River before I start spending serious money on Barkies at Knives Shipped Free. I just find the whole thing really confusing, and I would love to get your take on it. Okay, so that message is one of many similar that I've received over the last year or so with this question, or more specifically, these questions. And I'm going to kind of break down the questions into 2. There was actually a follow-up email to that got into one end of the Bark River controversy that I don't feel comfortable reading because I might have shared some things in that email that I'm not comfortable sharing on a video. So the first question, let's say, is of the character and ethics of Mike Stewart. And to transition from that question into the quality of the knives question, I'm going to share a little bit about Mike's personality. So first of all, there are old, very old sources of information on the internet and elsewhere that you might want to read about Mike's business ethics. And this goes back to his time as the founder, owner of Blackjack Knives in Effingham, Illinois. There are stories out there that, he closed the company in the middle of the night, leaving suppliers and employees hanging, and he disappeared with all the money. That he committed fraud. That he was prosecuted and imprisoned for such. And frankly, I had Mike's side of the story on this before I knew any of that controversy existed. And I did some research with some associates, people who knew Mike, who were objective in nature. And I think I can sort of share with you the essence of truth and all that as best I can discern it. So let's kind of talk about that. So Mike founds Blackjack Knives, and he makes knives in Effingham, Illinois. And I believe the move to Effingham happened as Blackjack had grown and was to a point where it needed to grow some more. And Mike was in one of those classic quandaries of a small business owner. The growth potential for his company was clearly there, but he didn't have the capital to fund that growth. And because he was a newer small business, bank loans for such growth really weren't an option. So he took on investors to capitalize the growth of Bark River, and I believe the move to Effingham, Illinois. So investors did happen. They did show up. They did give money to Bark River, and they did participate in its operation. The company did grow, and it did so successfully. Then investors in Bark River who weren't personally invested into its success not only decided to take their money and run, they took money that wasn't theirs and ran, leaving Mike Stewart and his baby, his identity, his company, Blackjack Knives, took them with them. So Mike was left at the helm, holding the bag with a lot of unpaid bills, with some debt, and no money and no investors. The till had been cleaned out. A bankruptcy ensued, a reorganization bankruptcy there was no coming back from. Mike loses the company. It essentially disappears from existence and becomes only a trademark that needed to be purchased, I believe, out of the bankruptcy court. And it was, and Blackjack Knives exists now under different ownership. And Mike has no part in it. So let's see, who lost in that deal? Well, certainly employees of Blackjack Knives lost. They lost their jobs. Certainly creditors, suppliers of Blackjack Knives lost. They had supplied material, maybe services, and never got paid for. Right? Who lost the most? Who lost his blood, sweat, and tears, his baby, his identity in the knife business, in the knife community, the company that was Blackjack Knives, and lots of personal fortune in the process. Mike didn't have this money squirreled away in a briefcase in a safety deposit box somewhere. It was gone. So his income and livelihood were gone. His fortune was gone, his personal savings, and his reputation was gone in many, many circles. Not with the people who know him, though. So fast forward to Mike's time with marbles. In fact, let's fast forward through that, shall we? Because he was a fiercely ethical man, loyal to his employees who felt a responsibility to participating in their livelihoods, when the ownership of Marbles Knife Company announced to him that they were going to cut his workforce by about 3/4, as he was the general manager of the Marbles plant, because they foresaw a higher profit margin in making most of their product line in China, Mike said, I guess that's your decision, but you'll not be doing it with me running your company. The next day, Mike was fired. On a Saturday morning, I believe. On Monday, the following Monday, Bark River Knives was born. And I include this story in this video because it goes to my first point about the truth of what happened in Effingham. When Mike started Bark River, he had really no money. The company was started in an outbuilding on his property at his home. And it was started to make knives, which requires handle materials, steel, fasteners, equipment, a remodel of his building, all of which cost money. He didn't have any money to pay for any of that. So people who knew him, contractors, material suppliers, steel warehouses, gave him money knowing that it was a pretty good bet he would succeed and make good on the borrowing of their time and treasure. That was 16 years ago. He made good. He now operates a growing business with about 50 employees, not in Bark River, but in neighboring Escanaba, Michigan. And he's a growing business. His employees love him. He's a civic leader. Local banks are in line waiting to fund his next capital improvement venture, of which there's kind of a major one coming. How do I know this? Well, because I spent a week ago Friday in his hip pocket all day long in his office, like sort of a fly on the wall, just watching Mike interact with employees, guests, suppliers, other community leaders, potential investors, charities. And let me tell you, here's the guy I know. Mike Stewart is in his mid 60s, late 60s. I don't know for sure. He's one of the great characters in knife lore. You know, he's right up there with Jim Parker. You know, he's taken some risks. He's had some things turn out wrong. But above it all, he loves knives, and he loves people who love knives. And he just loves people in general. He's at the point in his life where a legacy is really important to him. So leaving a thriving company to two of his kids, Jim and Jackie, is important to him. Helping Escanaba, and you guys have heard me make reference to this in other videos, helping Escanaba return to a point where it's a manufacturing center, and the business of making fixed blade knives, even folders, is the hub of what makes Escanaba successful. That's important to him. And he's got this other soft spot in his heart for custom knife makers who are really, really talented. They've been taught by the Knife Makers Guild to make really good knives. They're accomplished. And Mike told me once, he said, you know, the Knife Makers Guild is really, really good at two things. Teaching people to make knives the correct way and teaching them how to stay broke doing it. So you're going to see some things over the next year or two out of Bark River. You're going to see collaborations, co-branded knives, and you're going to see mid-techs from the alliance of custom makers that are congregating around Escanaba, Gladstone, and around Mike Stewart. This alliance is an organization, a loose confederation, you might say, of knife makers, with Mike as their mentor. And in order to benefit from his experience, not only in the process of making low production, high-end fixed blade knives, also in how to run a small business, and how to do it at a profit, how to handle growth and employing people. Their fee for being part of that alliance with Mike as their mentor amounts to exactly $0. Zero. So Mike is expanding this niche that is Bark River knives with a couple other smaller players. And in expanding the niche, he says a rising tide will lift all boats. So there are 6 or 7 or 8 guys who do not work for Bark River, and they're not partners with financially with Mike Stewart, and they're learning how to make a living and employ people making knives. Huh. He also has a very soft spot for his employees. If someone is in need who works for him, who's part of the Bark River family, and that is how he regards them, and it's not just lip service, if they're in need, he will help. And if their need is repetitive due to their own poor choices, he helps them learn to make better choices. He's just a great guy to work for. Okay, now let's transition from that. And by the way, I'm extremely confident in everything I've said in the last 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Not because I had one conversation with Mike and heard his side of the story and he has a Svengali-like quality about him. Because I've heard it, I've watched his walk, his actions, and I've talked to other people who know. Okay? Let's talk about his personality a little bit. Mike is an extremely intelligent guy with a very quick mind and very quick wit. He also has a bent for the sarcastic. And he's sarcastic sort of in 2 settings that I can tell. He's sarcastic when he knows the person he's talking to will appreciate the humor, number 1. And it's good-natured and makes people laugh. And then he also gets sarcastic with people who are antagonistic and think they know everything. And he's sarcastic at that point to expose them as know-it-alls who have all the answers and none of the questions, let's say. I've been the brunt of Mike's sarcasm, and I've been the brunt of his sort of dagger in the heart wit. We were having a conversation about steels last week, and there's a steel that I asked him if he had ever used in production of his knives because I was curious about it. I identified it as a crucible product. He knew what steel I was talking about. He knew it was made by Carpenter. And he said, I'm pretty sure that's a Carpenter product. And I'm like, no, it isn't. It's a CPM. And that's a crucible designation. And he's like, oh, okay. And he watched me Google it on my phone. And he watched me not be able to find it by the name that I had thought it was. And I did find it under Carpenter. And I looked up and I said, you're right. And he goes, I know I'm right. And I had a funny look on my face and I said, and he said to the funny look, you know how you can tell I'm right? I said, how? He said, because my lips were moving. From the next office through an open door 20 or 30 feet away, Mike's wife Leslie says, I hate it when you do that. You're a jerk when you do that. And he responded, he quipped, but I'm your jerk. And to those of us who like Mike, even love him in whatever way, we have a relationship with him, we kind of like that he's our jerk. So that's that. Now, let's talk about steel and quality, shall we? And I have these 3 knives in front of the camera because they are all in my arsenal for about a year, give or take. They're in 3 different materials and they have sort of 3 different functions. And they're my most carried 3 Bark Rivers, okay? This is a Little Creek LT, 1/8 inch stock A2. This is a featherweight Fox River, 83 thousandths stock LMAX. This is a Springbok in 156 stock 3V with a stain. This is really bothering me. Can you guys see that? Oh, Flitz, where are you? Okay. Anyway, I'm going to show you how they cut. Now, about a year old, all of them. These two are primarily used as EDCs, so they cut a lot of plastic tape, nylon reinforced tape, cardboard, opening boxes, a little bit of light whittling. Okay, the springbok has pretty much been used very little in EDC, but as a camp knife, processing kindling, feather sticks, that kind of stuff. All three of them were sharpened originally when they were brand new by me, and you guys have seen my convex system. And since then, nothing but strops. Okay, nothing but strops. So let's see what kind of edge damage these have endured. Okay, here's the little creek, the A2 knife. A little short thing, huh? Apparently that one still cuts pretty well after a year. Here's the featherweight Fox River. This is probably the most used knife of the three. And if you're listening close, you can hear a catch here or there. But still rather effortlessly glides through the Natchez Shooter Supply catalog paper and the springbok in 3V. A lot of impact with wood on this knife and very, very little damage at all. If I had to rank these knives just anecdotally in edge retention versus other knives that I own and other steels, I've got a lot of folders in S30V, S35VN, ZDP 189, CPM 20CV, CTSX HP. And you guys know when ZT started making knives out of LMAX and got it quite wrong a lot, I was not a big fan of LMAX, but of all the knives I own, edge retention on this knife is the best. And not an easy knife to heat treat or to grind. You guys know about LMAX's grind resistance. So it's an easy steel to screw up, let's say. Okay? I'm just here to tell you, I own 7 Bark Rivers. None of them have given me any indication that Bark River and Mike Stewart don't know what they're doing when it comes to processing, grinding, finishing a knife blade. Now, you guys know that, I guess it's about 6 years old now. There was a video by somebody whose accent indicates that he was probably Asian. He bought a custom Bark River knife from Knife Ship Free. It was ground paper thin, like paper thin. Probably sub 10 thousandths at the edge and for a long ways behind the edge. He did a video, and I'm not going to cut into this because it's brass, but he took a chopstick, put the knife into it at an angle, stopped, and then sort of pried with it. And well, I don't know what steel it was, doesn't matter. It was an extremely thin, high-performance slicer, and he wedged it basically into a small vise and then twisted it. What do you think happened? Yeah, it chipped. Shocking. So from that video ensued a discussion that's, I don't know, maybe still going on about how Bark River doesn't know how to heat treat a knife. Part of that discussion was, let's say there was some gas thrown on the flames because of Mike's sarcasm. One extremely respected YouTuber whom I respect a great deal, who has a very scientific, analytical, and statistically valid mind, dug into this and made contact in one of the forums with the Stewarts. And at some point, Jim or Mike or both got the impression that this guy was full of hot air, maybe, and antagonistic. So they started giving him Stewart-like answers. Answers like, we make 35,000 knives a year. I've been making knives for 30 years. I'm pretty sure I know how to do a good heat treat. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but your assertions are wrong. Okay? Simple as that. Now, I'm pretty sure that Mike knew that was going to set this guy off, and it did. But here's what I know. Now, background on me, guys. Before I was in the car business, long before I was ever a professional knife sharpener, I was a lab technician, quality control technician in a heat treating plant, actually several of them. Was never a certified metallurgist, but I was a functional metallurgist. Okay, I could test steels for hardness, other properties. I was able to section them, mount samples, etch them, look at them under microscopes, analyze microstructure, gas chromatograph testing. The whole realm. I know what heat treating is. I know what metallurgy is, and I'm not a babe in that woods. So one of the assertions made about Bark River is that they take a super steel alloy and they spend lots of time and effort heat treating it properly, which is a super complex process bordering on the mystical. Okay, and then they take that steel on a high-speed grinding belt and they bear down on that knife, and a shower of sparks comes off the knife, and they heat it up to near molten levels, and they plunge it into a bucket of cold water, which causes the water to flash boil on the surface of the knife, thus degassing the steel, and elements are released into the water, and the expensive alloy has been relegated to cheap Chinese Aus 6 poorly heat treated. Well, I'm here to tell you guys that's just not true. First of all, when I was a heat treater, let me tell you about how we got to a sample that could be analyzed for microstructure. We take a section, say, out of a piece of tooling. We would put it in a compound of bakelite powder in a heated press with the surface we wanted to look at down on a hot anvil. We'd put that under pressure. It would heat up. It'd take about 20 minutes. It would come out from granular bakelite into a solid disc of bakelite. And then we'd take it out to the surface grinder where we'd clamp it in a vise on a 60 grit grinding wheel. And we would shave off the surface of that with a shower of sparks, a veritable shower of sparks coming out the side. So we'd have a rough surface that we could now polish down, etch in acid, and look at under a microscope. Now this part of the examination is extremely vital. If we change the properties of that piece of steel, our analysis under the microscope is worthless. We needed to have a picture of that steel in its form as quenched and tempered, right? So that showering of sparks from the grinder, well, it just plain doesn't cause any trouble. Now, if you tried to take off too much material, let's say you tried to hog too much, you slowed the wheel down so its abrasive qualities were compromised, you would burn the mount. How could you tell the mount was burned? And burned means really excessively tempered. Well, how could you tell the mount was burned? Well, the bakelite would turn from red to sort of brown around the edge. And the color of the steel would change. Here, guys, is a color chart for tempered colors, okay? This would be a clean piece of steel as normalized. It's kind of silver. This would be the color as quenched, right out of the hardening process. This would assume like an oil quench in an atmosphere furnace, just slightly discolored from green. And then if it's tempered at 350, it starts to turn a wheat color. And then more of a golden at about 400. A deeper tan at 440. And at 500, it's kind of a rich brown. At 540, it's a purple. At 590, it's sort of a royal blue. And then sort of a steel blue at 650. And at 730, it starts to turn gray. Keep that color chart in your minds, guys. So we knew if we got one of our mounts too hot, we had to regrind it, be more careful, right? But remember, we're grinding it with a high-speed 60 grit wheel with a shower of sparks emanating from the end of the grinder. Much like the sparks you see if you watch a grind-in video at Bark River. Now, I've been to these grind-ins. I've been in the shop more than one time. I've even held a knife blade to a grinding belt with no gloves on. And, as the knife starts to get a little warm, that's a good idea, for the steel and for your fingers to dunk it in a little water. I've never seen the water flash boil. And if it did flash boil, if a gas bubble of water turned to vapor right at the edge of the blade and it dissipated into the water. That's called boiling. I'm pretty sure it didn't have any effect pulling elements in gaseous state out of the steel. But the main proof in the pudding is by this chart. You guys will remember this if you go back to the early ZT LMAX blades. We saw a lot of LMAX tips in this range. And this guy's between 500 and 600 degrees is the worst temperature for LMAX. It makes it really soft. Whoops. Down around 56 Rockwell. I've never seen a Bark River knife in any of its grinding process turn even a wheat color, even at the tip. Okay? So their process is sound. I am extremely confident of that. Now, what about heat treating? Does Mike Stewart know anything about heat treating? Well, let me tell you this. Because I'm an old heat treater, I've had lots of conversation with him about heat treating. He is very stingy with his knowledge because he's a heat treating Jedi. He just is. He's made me sort of guess at things he does in heat treating recipes that are a little outside the box, let's say. And he's been impressed by my guesses, but he still has a wry grin on his face because I'm guessing wrong. And my last trip to Escanaba, when I spent a whole Friday in his office, which was so cool. Every time I try to excuse myself and give him some space, he'd say, no, you stay. Which I just love the guy. But anyway, the more he has seen me be able to perceive, the more he's felt comfortable sharing with me. And the more he has been able to trust me, the more that he shares with me. And I'm not going to go into details of what he does different in heat treating steels than anybody else. But I'm quite confident that he knows what he's doing with heat treating steel. There's a reason he gets LMAX to perform like this. Thinly ground, at a very high hardness, and apparently pretty doggone tough. I'm not saying Bark River has never made a knife that had steel with poor mechanical qualities. Every manufacturer has. Guys, they make 35,000 knives a year, and they assemble them, grind them, and finish them by hand with humans. Can mistakes get made? Probably. Are there mistakes made by the external shop who does the flat bevel grinding? Probably. Accidents happen, okay? That's why their warranty's so good. Now, go back to that 6-year-old video. That was a Bark River Custom. That was obviously a Formula One car slicer, and somebody tried to fill it full of cinder blocks in the trunk and drive it off-road, okay? There's no warranty for that. You can't, you can't fix stupid, as we say. But bottom line, Bark River doesn't feel compelled to share the details of their processes on online forums because there's a reason that they're Bark River and nobody else is. They're protective of the things that make Bark River great. Now, could that message be delivered in a little more gracious fashion than Mike does at times? Perhaps. I'm guilty of the same, by the way. But rest assured, underneath it all, my friends, when you sign up to pay your $150, $200, $300, $400 for a Bark River knife, you've made a worthwhile investment. You've made a worthwhile investment in an extremely high quality product, and you've made a worthwhile investment in a business with the good of the community and satisfied customers in mind, who does business in an ethical fashion. That's all I have to say about that. Grace to you and peace, my friends, from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the Word and all of my used Bark River knives are sharp.